My name's Tim Ray. I work for a venture capital fund called ePlanet Ventures. We have offices globally, headquarters in Silicon Valley, but I think the thing that kind of differentiates the fund is the fact that we actually have one pool of capital and we invest in the US, Europe, and Asia. So we have a team in China, Korea, India, we have a small team here in Europe, and a team in the US. Again, one of the differentiating factors is if I find an interesting company here in Europe, the only way we can get an investment done is to get on the phone and convince my colleagues in China that our deal here in Europe is better than their deal in China, and you end up with an interesting kind of global benchmarking effect. So we have around about $1 billion under management. We're on our second fund. We've done about 95 deals. Prominent deals in Europe would be Skype, that everybody heard of, but our real home run in the first fund was a Chinese company called Baidu, which is the Google of China. We were the only institutional investor in that company. And so we have an interesting portfolio. I could also tell you about the 30 failures we've had, but those aren't nearly as interesting. We are pretty active in the market. We're probably doing 5-6 deals a year. I think the interesting aspect of how we got to voicemail is really linked to the evolution of the telephone. And so, it was the classic tape recorder thing at home. I'm not home, somebody's called me, leave a message. And it's interesting, check the message when I get home. Mobile really emerged in the model of our concept of telecoms. And I think that's maybe one of the challenges that telcos face now is, there's still a very telco-centric view of mobile telephony, when in fact, the platform has morphed into something that is potentially very different. That's a really clear symptom of where voicemail is for the operators. It's a pain in the butt. It's an annoying thing. They've got banks and banks. I mean, they must have banks and banks of servers storing all of these dumb messages, which are basically along the lines of, "Hey, call me back when you get a chance." And you think, who was that? If you call me and you don't get through to me, my voicemail says, "Send me an email." Or if you're not that interested in getting a quick response, you can leave a voice message, and I might listen to it tonight. But if you really want to get in touch, leave me an email or send me an email. And so I think what you described, the kind of here's your voicemail because we kind of think we've got to give it to you. We don't really know how to make money out of it, but it's a sort of obligation for some reason that we haven't thought about, and it's a real annoyance. It's an expense on our side. So here you go. It's not from my perspective, it's not a real value-added element of communications. And if you break it down, it's like, I've got a voicemail because somebody tried to call me, and I either wasn't there or I didn't answer the phone because it didn't show me their number and I didn't know who it was, and I didn't want to get drawn into all of that. And chances are the person who's calling me, the reason why it went to voicemail is because we didn't prearrange the call. And actually maybe it's more me, but I tend to arrange all of my calls because I want to be able to say, I'm sitting down, this is what we're going to discuss, what's the story, let's figure it out, do whatever we need to do. Instead of, oh, I'm on a train, or you can waste so much of your life saying, actually, I'm too busy to do this, call me back later. I mean, when you look at visual voicemail, I think it's obviously a step forward, but it's actually making something that was really quite awful and irrelevant, moderately less challenging, or it's reducing the friction of voicemail a little bit, if you see what I mean. And the idea that actually I could go and listen to the voicemail from you and skip the 20 from the guy who's trying to sell me something, it is hopeful. It's a start. But I think still there, if you kind of peel that back a little bit and say, well, why have I got a voicemail? I've got a voicemail because somebody tried to contact me without thinking, what's the guy doing? Is he ready for me to contact? Does he want to talk to me? And I think, for me, one of the really interesting trends that I think will revolutionize communications is the notion of presence. And I think that's, I almost hesitate to say the word because I think there are a lot of people in telco land who think, oh yes, presence, our RCS, GSMA-based initiative to do all kinds of presence things. Yeah, I think people have made presence very complicated and very standards-based. In reality, I think presence will emerge as a really critical cornerstone to communications in general, and it won't be telco driven. It'll be driven by some really straightforward common sense things, possibly dominated by Facebook. Where am I? What am I doing? Do I want to talk to you? Or if you want to talk to me, here's what you should do. And if you contact me outside of consulting my presence, if I've made my presence known and my preferences known, and you call me anyway, yeah, I'm definitely not going to answer your phone call, and I'm probably not even going to listen to your voicemail. Here's the score, here's the rules. If you want to get in touch, this is what we do. And once you know my terms of engagement, you should really kind of play ball. And then voicemail, as we know it, voicemail in terms of I couldn't get a hold of this person, so I left them a message, I think kind of dies. And there's another aspect of voicemail that potentially emerges, which is actually this is a convenient way to get you a message. And so if there's a convenient way for you to listen to it, there's no problem with me saying, hey, I noticed that you're in a meeting until kind of 5. I'm not sure what you're doing this evening, but yeah, if you have a chance, kind of give me a shout. And this is where visual voicemail comes in a little bit because it's reducing the friction of you getting my message. I think we can, it's probably reduce the friction like 10%. I think we can reduce the friction by kind of 70 or 80%, and just make it a non-annoying way for people to get a message to you, and that message ends up being more useful and more about kind of coordinating the main event. And I think that's kind of where hello mail comes in for me. Somebody leaves you a message and they reduce the friction because they just send it to your inbox. Or maybe, depending on how you work, it goes to your inbox or whatever. You don't have to go and dial something or incur some extra charge. And that, for me, that kind of starts to tie in with, the value of SMS. It's asynchronous, it's non-committal. If people don't have time to look at it, hey, don't look at it. And a lot of what Poweringo does is also kind of similar to that, in the sense that Poweringo has the normal text messaging, but also a push-to-talk voice. And we're looking at kind of more creative ways for people to kind of get stuff in and out of that. But yeah, that's where I think that aspect of hello mail also makes sense. I've got a phone, I don't have some special client, maybe I just dial the person's number and I don't have to worry about them picking it up, but I can get them a message that I know is not going to be a pain for them to listen to. I think we're in for a really interesting kind of 2 to 3 years where, between Google, Apple, and maybe a couple of others, the operators are going to have their lunch at. And I think we're seeing the kind of classic response we expect from operators, which is let's go on the defensive. Let's all the net neutrality stuff in the U.S. is just hilarious. It's an elaborate campaign fundraising scheme for people in the U.S. Congress to kind of say, as long as we keep this issue live, Google and all these operators are going to be donating to our campaigns. So that's going to go on for years. But I think the operators are just somehow naturally defensive and say, how can we block this? How can we prevent this from happening? It's going to happen. And if you actually, as an operator, I think if operators take a wholehearted approach to trying to facilitate that and enable it to happen in a rich way and play to their strengths, I think we all get to a happier place, them included. So I think the question in my mind is will that happy scenario play out, or will we have the inevitable kind of struggle with one side being defensive and the other side being kind of trying to go over the top, as it were.
Thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure.